I think we'll hear the
Members of Parliament rush in, chucking bundles of the government's Brexit policy out to fellow MPs. The brand new Secretary of State had been trying to take questions before MPs were given the chance to read it. But the Speaker said piles of copies sitting in an office right next to the chamber must be handed out immediately.
Members of Parliament should have a copy of the white paper.
It will be immediately. It will be made available as soon as is practically possible.
The session was briefly suspended to give MPs time to read it.
I will therefore suspend the sitting of the House for 5 minutes.
When they got their hands on it, MPs saw the white paper proposes what it calls a common rule book. The UK would apply EU rules on manufactured and agricultural goods. Where there was disagreement on rulings, reference would be made up to the European Court of Justice. The much bigger services sector would face barriers to trade with the EU, staying outside its rules. EU citizens would be able to travel to the UK for temporary business activity without a visa. A new customs arrangement could come into force around 2022. For 1 hour, it was relentless critical questioning from pro-Brexit Tory MPs. Was the government going to trade a softer immigration policy with the EU for economic benefits?
The people voted for Brexit because they wanted to control migration, and they don't want to be sold down the river on this point as the negotiations proceed.
Was the common rule book just the single market dressed up?
How can he justify the use of the adjective common in describing the noun rule book when he's committed to ongoing harmonisation, even with a parliamentary process? It is their rule book, isn't it?
I have deep misgivings about what the government is proposing, but I would like, having voted to leave, I voted to leave, not to half leave.
But it's not for me to say.
President Trump in Brussels misheard a question about hard Brexit and then plunged in, siding with critics of Theresa May's new Brexit policy.
Oh, hard Brexit, I see. I thought you said it was heartbreaking. I said that might be going a little bit too far, right? Heartbreaking. Is it heartbreaking? A lot of things are heartbreaking. No, I would say that, you know, Brexit is Brexit. It's not like, I guess when you use the term hard Brexit, I assume that's what you mean. The people voted to break it up. So I would imagine that's what they'll do, but maybe they'll take it a little bit of a different route. So I don't know if that's what they voted for. I just want the people to be happy. They're great people.
Theresa May, before leaving the NATO summit in Brussels, insisted her policy would get a good hearing across town at the European Union's headquarters.
What we've heard so far from other leaders and from Brussels is actually a positive response, that this is a proposal that we can sit down and start increasing the pace of the negotiations on this particular issue.
Many in Parliament have been working on decision trees to see what might happen next. In theory, what could happen now is that the Chequers deal is signed off by the EU and presented to Parliament for approval, which MPs duly give. What is the probability that Brussels, the EU 27, look at this white paper today and just say, all of it, absolutely fine, where do we sign?
0% probability of that happening. The EU sees this as an opening gambit.
The EU is certain to demand concessions, making this even more unpalatable to many Tory MPs. Some think 60 to 100 Tory MPs could oppose it. Does the Prime Minister then try to get pro-EU Labour MPs' support? What would it take to get that?
I think if Theresa May were to come forward with a proposition which was more like a customs union and a single market, she would find that there was a majority in the House for it, including a significant number of Labour MPs, if not all of the Labour Party.
That means losing the Conservative Party in the process. Big chunk of it.
The Prime Minister's got to get it into her head she's not just the leader of the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party hasn't a majority in the House of Commons. She's the Prime Minister.
If all Labour MPs oppose the deal and a few Tories rebel, there could be no deal, and we could be very close to crashing out in March 2019. Some Brexiteers say that's when the EU gives in under pressure and makes concessions.
You would suddenly find the German car industry and the French wine producers saying to their own governments, come on, get on with it, we need to do a deal.
But if it's no deal and nobody's budging, Some think that could be when MPs take things in a different direction, perhaps demanding another referendum, or deciding we need more time and we're staying in for longer.
Mr Barnier plays us along for time. We begin to look like we're running out of time, and then the establishment in this country start to ask for a suspension of Article 50.
When politics become dysfunctional like this, and when you're up against a very tight timetable and deadline, what tends to happen is that the likelihood of the extremes increase. So I think what has happened last week is that the likelihood of an extension of Article 50 or even Brexit being stopped, even though I think that's unlikely, have probably gone up. Or certainly soft Brexit has gone up. But equally, I think it's a hard Brexit or a disorderly Brexit or a WTO Brexit has also gone up, because we just don't know exactly how politics will play out.
A fuller EU response is expected soon. Yesterday, cameras at the NATO summit picked up images of a stumbling European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker. As President Macron greets him, he's shaky on his feet. Later, the presidents of Finland and Ukraine appear to be propping him up. After descending from the stage, the Dutch Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Portugal lend supporting hands. Both of them later said Mr. Juncker had been troubled by a bad back.
Well, one of the key objectives of the White Paper is to create a new economic partnership with the EU, reflecting pressure from many business groups that there should be as little disruption as possible after Brexit. Today, industry got some of what it wanted, though it still needs more detail in many key areas. But financial services gave a very different story, warning it was a blow to them. Mrs May has been under pressure from the city and industry for a clear picture of how we will trade with the EU after we leave. Today, it was industry that heard a bit more of what it wanted. The government thinks it can minimise any disruption at our ports by setting up a system to collect customs for both the UK and the EU as goods move in and out of the country. Business organisations like the idea, but wonder if it's practical. One has suggested it could take 10 years to set up. Industry also has questions about what will replace free movement of people. It fears government talk of allowing in the brightest and the best ignores their need for workers of all skills. And any replication of the current system for non-EU migrants will bring more bureaucracy and extra cost. And the Prime Minister is also struggling to keep the city happy. Financial services companies approved in London can currently sell their products across Europe. The city hopes that system would be replaced by new rules mutually recognised by the UK and the EU. But there's no sign of that in the White Paper, and little detail on what will happen, though the government makes clear there will be less access to European markets in the future. Well, earlier I spoke to Carolyn Fairburn, Director General of the CBI, and I asked her if she was happy with the White Paper.
Chequers last week and then the White Paper today has put forward at least some serious proposals, particularly on goods. Gaps on services, still a lot of white space to be filled in, but it's progress and something that can at least get us around the negotiating table with the European Union.
If the CBI is saying this is progress, the Brexiteers are going to say, well, that's not the progress we want.
Well,
because they see you as the sort of the voice of Remain.
Well, we are. I think this is all about jobs, and I think that what business has tried to do is put evidence on the table, really practical evidence about what this means at borders, what this means for just-in-time manufacturing. That's not about leave or remain.
Do you think those warnings from people like Airbus and BMW have helped?
I think they're very real. I think that the thing that is important in all of this is to realise these are real jobs, they're goods crossing borders, people actually making things, and that I don't think had come out enough. We have spoken to lots of companies who are uncomfortable about speaking out because actually they are worried that their German competitor will take their business if they do. Politicians
from different parties are against this for different reasons. You've got the hard Brexiteers in the Conservative Party who are going to vote against it, and you've got Labour on the other side dicing with the idea of voting against it because they think they might get into power if they defeat the government on this. What is your message to these people?
And what do I think you have got from a business community? You know, we're not politicians. What we want is for politicians everywhere, and it's talking about the EU as well, to put the national interest first, look at the evidence, put ideology to one side. This is so serious.
The government is making a great deal of saying freedom of movement will be over. You know, that's gone. It's very clear in the White Paper. And yet there are all sorts of suggestions within that white paper that certain sectors will still have mobility or people will be able to move in and out of the country. I mean, how important is that to you?
It's incredibly important. And particularly, I would say, the mobility of people. I think sometimes we don't distinguish enough in our debate between immigration, people moving here permanently, and the mobility that you need for trade and for business. You know, we are an 80% services economy. Services are largely about people. They are film editors moving across borders. They are data programmers moving in for a project. And what I think this white paper does do, it recognises the need for the mobility of people working in services. Freedom of movement, I think everybody recognises, as we know, it will end. That came out, business recognises that. But what we put in its place, I think that's the big question.
I mean, you're appealing for Europe to come around the table, for politicians to put the national interest first now. I mean, this is starting to sound a bit desperate.
It's not desperation. I think it's pragmatism and that recognition that that clock carries on ticking.
But there are loads of Brexit voters out there who don't care about the clock ticking. You know, who say, well, it doesn't matter if we get no deal. We'll sort it all out eventually and Britain can prosper.
150,000 businesses that only export to Europe. They have no means of putting in place technology to deal with customs, tariffs and blocks. I would just ask them to look at the evidence on that. It's a very competitive world at the moment. We have got great businesses in this country. Do we really want to put a brake on them right now? I think it'd be a very bad thing for our country.